Hey there, this is Marc Brunet with Brunet.com. In this third chapter, we're going to be taking the sketch that I started in the previous chapter, and then we're going to refine it a little bit more. So where we left off was in a state where everything was really rough, as you can see here. Everything is kind of blocked in, all the main shapes are there, all the main elements are there, composition, all this stuff, but there are no real details yet. So this is the important part where we sort of finalize the line art before we're ready to actually color it. The way we're going to be approaching coloring in the following chapters is very it's a lot closer to comic book art, I would say, compared to traditional painting. So we're gonna maintain the lines throughout the process and until the end. So the lines will remain. So what that means is that they have to be a little bit cleaner than they normally would be, because we are going to be doing after that the flats for the different regions of the drawing, meaning, let's say, like the character is gonna have different color, different flat color for her skin, for her suit. It's just a way to be able to create like different regions so that we can use the lasso tool a little bit later if we want to select those particular regions to be able to color them easily, or change their color or whatever. So knowing that we are going to be doing flats after this particular step, it's good to keep in mind to to have the line art to be as clean as possible. So it's not the case right now for mine, that's for sure. So I'm gonna be going over pretty much all the lines that you see, and at the same time that I'm adding the details, I'm also going to be sort of polishing the lines. That means just erasing the lines that are already there that are a bit too thick or too rough, and then just erase it and then paint it again, paint it in the same position that it was, but just I guess like take my time a little bit more. So now the focus is not really on design. The design has been established already. All I need to do now is use my dexterity to make sure that the lines are pretty and nice, and they flow well. One way to actually, there's no way to do this. I was gonna say one way to improve your lines. There really isn't any particular way to improve your lines. You can do a bunch of exercises like tracing like a curved line, and then trace it and try to trace other lines that are parallel to that line, that first line, that initial line that you traced, and try to draw those following lines as close to the initial one as possible, while never touching, and in the fastest stroke as possible. So that's one way. I used to do that when I was a little bit younger, and I guess it kind of worked. It practices dexterity, that's for sure. But other than that, it's just a matter of drawing, and if you take your time and you don't feel in a rush, and make sure that your line are nice and smooth, and that your wrist is not shaking too much, that your position is nice so that you can control the movement. Yeah, it's just a lot of practice, and what that allows you to do is spend less time on that step that we're doing now, because you won't have to retrace your line too much. The way I see the style that I'm going for is, in terms of line at least, the line style that I'm going for is kind of in between like comic book ink. So let's say like an inked page. A lot of most comic books they go through that. So you'll have the pencil sort of draft first, which is very nice lines already, and then there's going to be an inker that comes after that, and then that person just sort of traces over the lines that are already there, and just making them really nice so that it's easy to color afterwards. I'm not going to go to that extent, so I'm not going to create a new layer and then sort of paint on the lines, the ink inked lines after that. I'm gonna skip that. Instead, I'm just gonna spend a little bit more time on what would be the pencil stage, which is what we have right now. And that, yeah, that just means, you know, erasing the lines that are not super pretty, and then sort of retracing them as best as I can. But I'm not going for insane, you know, resolution here, or like super precise lines, because this drawing is pretty big. If I want to make sure people can sort of see it all on the, you know, on their monitor when they look at it, and not have to zoom in too much, that means that the lines, I mean, there's a lot of details. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, there's a lot of details already. So the details up close might not look as nice, but when you zoom out to make the image full page, there's actually a lot going on there. So the lines don't need to be as sharp up close. So you can see I'm just going over the, you know, everything that's been there already, and just adding on details to make this a little bit more interesting. The way to think about this is that you know, everything around the focal point, which is the main character, kind of like, yeah, the main character slash her face. Those two elements are going to be pretty much what the eyes is most attracted to, because that's the most common in nature. At least when you look at other people, you're first attracted to their faces. And you're more easily attracted to other people as opposed to objects, inanimate objects. So, you know, if you had those two, if you had, you know, let's say a landscape and a person in it, you'd probably look at the person first. That's just how we're wired, and that behavior sort of translates when you're looking at art. So most of the time when a character is present in the piece, and when a character is, I guess, defined enough that it, you know, it looks like a person, the eye will be drawn to that first. So you can use that to your advantage when you work with, you know, when you're planning your composition. In this case, I know that most people are going to look at the character first, so I want all the details in the surrounding area to be of, I guess, higher accuracy, higher detail. That makes no sense. I want the details to be more refined in that area. Everything closer to the edges of the canvas, or, you know, a little bit below, so like around the legs of the robot, for example, those lines don't need to be as tight, because the eye is not going to be looking at that too much, because there's not as much going on there. It's not as interesting for your eyes to be looking at. So yeah, just keep in mind that everything around the character and the character itself, herself, is going to be a little bit higher in details. So everything's going to be a little bit more polished around there, and that's where you should really spend the time if you're going to work on your own. You know, spend the time around where the eye is going to be looking at. Otherwise, you kind of, you know, wasting your time. So when I'm adding detail, in this case, I didn't really have a plan for the kind of, you know, amount of detail that I was going to put in. And at some point I run into problems where it just starts to be a little bit harder to read. And that's when line weight becomes really, really important. So line weight is just, you know, a skill that allows, that facilitates, I guess, the read of a drawing. So if all your lines are the same weight, meaning if they're all the same thickness, and then the same value, so the same, let's say it's all the same shade of, it's all black, let's say, for example, to keep it simple. If all your lines are pure black and they're all the same width, and you have a character or like an illustration that has a lot going on in there, it's going to be really, really hard to read it, and it's going to be very unpleasant to look at. When you have good line weight, what it does is that it sort of organizes everything and makes it easier for your brain to process, and, you know, makes it nicer to look at, basically. And good line weight is making sure that everything that is important has the most weight. So the lines that are the most important have the most weight, and by weight can be different things. So that's something important to remember. Weight can be either thickness and the value of your line. So let's say you have a line that's very light versus a line that's very dark. The darker one's going to have more weight to it, meaning it's going to attract the eye more. And then you can play with those notions in very interesting and different ways. So let's say you have you know, different elements within your illustration that are you know, at different depth in the illustration. So let's say the best example would be a landscape where you have different trees, I guess, that are at different, you know, different distance from the camera, I guess. So you have the trees in the foreground, and the tree, like one tree in the middle ground, and one tree in the far background. The way you would want to treat that is that the tree that's in the foreground, the thickness of the lines are going to be a little bit bigger, and then as far as you know, as far as you move back in the scene, the line's going to get thinner and thinner, and possibly lighter and lighter, to make it seem as if there is this fake atmospheric perspective, meaning that everything that's, you know, farther back becomes harder to see for the eye. You can do also, what I like to do is whenever there are you know, lines that are in the shadows, for example, I'll have those be a little bit thicker than the ones that would be facing the light source. So in this case, you know, it's a line art, so you can think, well, there's no light source in there, it's just, you know, black and white. But you can start to sort of incorporate your light source while you're doing your line weighting. So let's say you have, you know, that you're gonna have at least for sure a top-down light, you know, something that's coming from the top. Then you can have all the lines that are that are facing up, I guess, all the lines that are, you know, sort of contouring the top surface of all the shapes, all the elements in your illustration. You can have those lines be a little bit thinner or a little bit lighter, to make as if you know, light was hitting there, and then everything that's in the shadows, maybe the lines are a little bit thicker to sort of suggest that there's shadows there. I also like you know, things that, again, kind of like similar to the landscape example that I gave, things that are overlapping in the scene. So let's say you have, you know, the sort of the chest plate of the mech that you can see here in between the two legs. Now that thing is in front of the character, so I'm going to make sure that the outline of that shape is a little bit thicker than everything that comes you know, after that. So everything that's, you know, behind that particular shape is going to have a slightly thinner outline. And that's kind of how I organize my elements in my scene. So everything that's closer to us has a little bit thicker lines, and everything is further, you know, farther back has a little bit lighter lines, and lighter or thinner. This is also, you know, very important to organize chaos. So for example, like my character now is surrounded by details, but you can make some of those details less important than others by tweaking the, you know, the lightness of the brightness, I guess, of the lines and the thickness of them. So, you know, I started off with details that were very, very you know, kind of similar in line thickness, and then as we move along this, you know, this chapter, I'm going to be refining the lines, making sure that certain elements read better by tweaking their line weight. So line weighting is very, very important. You can see it. I'm starting to, I started to do it around the character, for example. So the lines contouring the character are a little bit darker, they're a little bit thicker, so that the character pops. Of course, you know, I added sort of a flat gray to separate the two, but even without that, it was, you know, it was already starting to pop out a little bit more, because yeah, that's something that can really ruin a drawing. I see a lot of that in, you know, in artists that are not as experienced, is their line weighting is going to be terrible even though their drawing is awesome, and that completely ruins everything. So it's you have to be very, very careful with line weights. it can really make a drawing, but it can also destroy it. Now, talking about some of the details that I've been adding here. So, what I think about when I think of sort of mechanical design or design in general is something that I've repeated in the past. It's often about the 70-30 rule. So, as a quick refresher, what I like to think about whenever I draw, whenever I design elements, is to have 70% of sort of an easier read, and then 30% of, I guess, denser content, things that are a little bit more intricate, a little bit more detailed, and by keeping this ratio of sort of a relaxed area and then another area that's a little bit smaller, so 30% compared to 70%, this 30% that has a lot of details sort of attract the eyes more, because there's just more things there. It attracts the eye because of its rarity, because it's it's in the minority. It's only 30% versus 70% of all the rest, and also it's higher frequency and details, so the eye is just naturally attracted to that. But if the entire drawing was that way, if the entire design was just completely filled with details, it wouldn't make for a nice read, and the result would be pretty bad. So it's always good to have kind of areas where you can relax, and then other areas that you look at and then there's more content there. So bite-sized content all around. And the way you distribute that also, always think of the 70-30 rule. That's very it's a very good ratio to memorize, because it just tends to work all the time. If I'm gonna have a lot of details, just make sure that 70% of the areas have a little bit less details, or detail that is not as hard to understand, or let's say maybe you're playing with the line weights in that sense. So 70% of your lines are going to be easier to read, so maybe lighter and thinner, so they don't have as much of an impact, as much of a weight to them. And then 30% of your line is going to be a little bit darker, a little bit more prominent. So 70%, the 70-30 ratio applies to everything. So it applies to designs, like I've been talking. It also applies to line weight, like I just mentioned also, and color applies to lighting, applies to composition, it applies to everything. So it's like a magic number that if you can remember to use at every step of the way, you'll probably end up in a better position than someone that has similar skill but that doesn't use it. So I guess the best example in this particular case would be the armor plate. The armor plate would be where the 70% comes in. So that's the place where your eyes can relax, because there's not much going on there, as opposed to the inside of the mech, for example, where the character is, where there's a lot of tiny details and mechanical parts. That would be the 30%. So if you look at it, if you squint, everywhere around the character, directly around the character itself, not so much. I would consider that within the 70% also, because if you squint, it's kind of just white, but around her, there's a lot going on, and that would be the 30%. At least part of the 30%, a big part of it would be in that area, and then the other part would be smaller details here and there, maybe at the joints, for example, of the mech. There's more going on there. The hands also, there's a little bit higher frequency of details there, just because it's more complex shapes. And on my shoulder itself, you can see the little all the little decals and that kind of stuff. So. But overall, when you look at it, when you squint, you'll see that around 70% of the entire drawing is just areas where your eyes can relax a little bit more. So it's not as high frequency in detail, and that just creates a better read. Now, if I want to talk about a little bit of my, inspirations for this particular character, I always like to mix two things that are kind of opposite whenever I design, new things. So, just an example would be taking something mechanical, so something very, very futuristic, and then adding on to that elements of, of the past. So let's say like medieval elements to something like that, and that always creates an interesting contrast. So for example, maybe taking this futuristic mech and then adding on to that like a big cloak, or like a big like a big cape. Obviously it's a mech, it doesn't need the cloak, there's no real purpose for it other than to try to kind of look like a human, so it adds a little bit of mystery, and also it adds something different. What I try to avoid is sticking to one particular theme. I think it's just it's just a little bit like a missed opportunity to create something new, something fun. In this particular case, what I was thinking about is I have this character, this mech. I mean, the character itself, she's not, she's nothing special, but the mech itself, which has the most of the design elements of the entire piece. What I was going for with this is a mech that is a little bit more organic, so something that's made more like a I guess a Japanese doll, something like that looks like a human, but you can clearly see that it has joints, and it's it's not real. Obviously, it's a doll, something like that. So where the legs are kind of they kind of look human, but upon closer inspection, obviously it's a robot. Same thing for the shoulders. It's not this it's not these big geometric shapes that would probably make more sense, but instead it's those round shapes, like a little bit more organic, and then inside are filled with mechanical things just to make it work. So yeah, this organic and then mechanical sort of combination I really liked. And also this is why this robot has kind of like regular arms, almost with proper muscle placement, and that is always it's always an easy trick to use. So anything that kind of reminds the viewer of real anatomy, while being not real anatomy, is always an easy way to make an appealing design. So you'll see me use that trick a lot whenever I do, whenever I design things. In this case also, obviously I used it a lot for the robot itself, or the arms and the legs, but for the character, her bodysuit, you can see like all the different designs. They kind of, all the different not designs, but all the lines, they kind of follow the same directions as the muscles underneath would. So if if you can imagine the obliques for the abs, and then the abdominal muscles, everything, like all the lines that are on her like abdomen area, they're all following kind of those lines already. So when you look at it, it doesn't look as alien as another design that has nothing to do with human anatomy might. Instead, it looks like something that's a little bit more familiar, like it's something that already works because it kind of looks like anatomy, and anatomy, I mean, by default works. So yeah, it's an easy trick to remember. At this point, most of the details are done. I still have a couple, line refinements here and there to finalize, but everything is pretty much done. So yeah, all I'm gonna be doing until the end of this chapter is letting the video play, and I'll be just refining the lines, making sure everything is nice and sharp and not too sketchy, so that we are ready for the next chapter, in which we are going to be doing the flats for just to get the color started. So I'll see you then.